Welcome to the Union Federation podcast, where we discuss both Star Trek and the Orville here on the Fandom Podcast Network. In this episode, we are discussing the Orville New Horizons, Season 3, Episode 3, Mortality Paradox. My name is Kevin, and I'm going to be your host and your captain for this episode. But I'd like to introduce my co-captain, my fellow, co-founder of this Fandom Podcast Network that we all love. Please welcome Mr. Kyle Wagner. How are you, sir?
I'm a little scared because I can't tell if over your shoulder that is either Roxy the Rancor or Randall.
That's Roxy the Rancor. I fixed my camera there a little bit, but yeah. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing well. Excited once again to talk about the Orville. Kevin, I gotta tell you that we're going into this one. I'm not quite sure if I've got my brain wrapped around this episode of the Orville yet. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, it's taken me a couple of rewatches and listening and reading other people's opinions to kind of shape my opinion thus far, I guess. Well, let's get into this. First of all, we are discussing the Orville Season 3 episode Mortality Paradox, and we're going to be spoiler about this, so warning. Spoilers ahead for this episode, and let's go ahead and get right into it, and let's open up that quantum drive. All right, Mortality Paradox aired on June 16th, 2022, ran about an hour and 5 minutes, and here is the Captain's Log episode synopsis. After Tala returns from shore leave, a strange signal leads the crew to Naren 1, a world previously believed to be desolate and uninhabitable, only to find a vastly populated world with contemporary technology. Ed takes Tala, Kelly, Bortus, and Gordon to the surface to investigate, and they find themselves caught in a series of increasingly strange and dangerous situations where they each have a brush with death, culminating in a scenario where the Orville is nearly destroyed by a Kalan vessel. The real Tala contacts a ship where Lamar has been frantically searching for the landing party, and the illusions are eventually revealed to be a work of a group of immortal beings, one of them having disguised herself as Tala from the multiphasic world the crew discovered 2 years ago, their civilization having advanced 50,000 years since their last meeting. It is revealed that they subjected the crew to the scenarios to help themselves understand mortality as their society has begun to become stagnant. The crew return to the ship and discuss the implications of their own immortality. So, Kyle, I wanted to get your first reactions to this episode, but before I do want to mention the connection that this episode has to a season 1 episode of the Orville called Mad Idolatry. And if you guys remember, this was the episode 12, the last episode of season 1, aired back in December 7th, 2017. And this is where Grayson leads a shuttle team that crashes on a suddenly apparent planet with a Bronze Age society. And after leaving, the crew discovers that the planet phases in the universe for a very short period every 11 days as 700 years passes on the planet. They discover that their first visit has resulted in a religion that worships Kelly Grayson and has since grown into a theocracy resembling Earth's Middle Ages. Admiral Ozawa reprimands Mercer for omitting mention of the contamination and orders no further contact with the planet. Mercer and Grayson defy this order by returning to the planet to reveal the truth to the society's religious leader, but a subordinate assassinates him. But the planet's next appearance, its society is comparable to early 21st century Earth, with religious bickering and strife. Resolving to end the suffering, Isaac stays on the planet when it phases out, spending 700 years with them. When the planet reemerges, it has progressed into an interstellar space travel, and 2 of its representatives return Isaac to the Orville, where they inform the crew that despite the tumultuous effect his arrival created, its society evolved away from worshiping Commander Grayson. They suggest that their progress over millennia ahead they may study the Union. And if you remember this episode, Kyle and listeners, we get the futuristic people dressed in these little glowing white outfits, which is very similar to the character that we see in this episode. Denal also has a similar kind of Tron-y looking, futuristic, shiny outfit. So, Kyle, what is your first impressions of this episode?
Well, first of all, are we sure we're on Union Federation? Are we not? We're dealing with Immortal. Shouldn't we be on Blood of Kings?
I know, right? Yes, our Highlander podcast. Yes.
No, honestly, I wasn't quite sure how to feel after this episode ended, because I came out of this episode. I once they established the connection to the first episode, I liked that aspect of it. I really thought that was intriguing, and it sets up to have these characters reappearing throughout. Whatever, if they do more of this season, or if we get more seasons of the Orville somewhere down the road. But what I didn't like, and this is something that I'm noticing as a trend with the Orville, is as intelligently written as it was, this was also a very tropey episode in the aspect of, we've seen this kind of thing before. Oh yeah, they've been captured, they're in a weird situation, things are weird, and we turn out that they're going through some kind of tests. And the way this episode opened up with them being kind of on the planet and then coming across a high school, that set up for a lot of fun things for the Orville, and they really just didn't pay it off. This is something I really feel like before you would have had some great high school jokes and things like that. And again, not over the top, but you would have had some fun moments, and you didn't really have that. And it's just something that I'm noticing is, I love the Orville, but I also love the fact that the Orville, while staying true to its kind of Star Trek kind of feel and vibe to it, but it still had some fun. And I still feel like they haven't really brought that fun aspect fully into this new season of the Orville yet, Kevin.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that a little bit later, but I was thinking the same thing. We had a few little moments, but on paper, this script and this idea sounds really, really cool. But I think the delivery of it with, the live action and effects and stuff like that might have fallen a little short for me as well. It did have its moments, but I was kind of like, kind of going through the motions of this, going, okay, where are they going with this? I thought the whole high school thing played out a little long. There were some interesting moments in it, only to find out, okay, this does something to Malloy at the end with the bully. Okay.
Yeah.
Where he has a near death experience. And then the other moments with the other people and their near death experiences were a lot shorter. You know what I mean? It seems like we spent a lot more time in high school and setting this up, which kind of threw me off a little bit, because that ended up showing, as I mentioned, Malloy's near-death experience, while the others was just kind of, a minute or less. At least that's the way that I felt. And so this episode, it talks, it's this character that we're going to discuss in a minute here that's kind of putting everyone through their motions and wanting to relive what their near-death experiences are like, because they've grown tiresome of their own immortality, so to speak. And I just felt that the show was a little off balance telling that, where they spent too much time in the high school, I guess. Am I alone with that part?
No, you were hitting the nail right on the head for me here, Kevin, because it felt like, okay, why did we spend so much time in this high school and then everything was shortened up? And I think the problem with that was too, Kevin, it kind of gave away what they were trying to do by having that kind of off balance. It kind of tipped the hand. Like, there's more, you could see the tropes starting to come. One of the things too that I found very frustrating with this is they actually set up a very cool idea in the end when they're still within the holographic realm, or whatever they want to call it, when they're all on the Orville and the Federation fleet, the Union Federation, the Union fleet is coming towards them, and then you have Isaac saying, no, they're Kalon. He can see through the disguise, and then you have the confrontation between the ensign and
Charlie.
Isaac, yeah. Charlie and Isaac. But I thought it set up something really cool. In fact, they have a Kalon on board who can see through their deceptions. And then it turns out it's in a hologram. So is that legit or not? So I'm
Right.
like, but it's a really cool concept. I hope they explore in future episodes. But again, the episode just felt unbalanced and kind of all over the place. Like it really didn't quite know what direction it wanted to go in. And then when we get the payoff at the end, it feels like a very quick, short segment.
Right. I did like the connective tissue with the previous episode. I always like it when series do that, especially when it's episodic television, because it's important that, you know, we've talked about recently on this Union Fed podcast discussing Strange New Worlds that we're loving the return of episodic television. But we do like it when these standalone episodes make reference to other episodes in the past. And I did like the fact that they did return to a season 1 episode that, you know, the effects that Kelly Grayson had on that planet, where they, idolized the Kelly, so to speak, you know. And it was nice that this was kind of, a being that came from that society. I thought that was kind of cool. I want to touch on the cast here. First of all, it was directed by John Kazar again, written by Sherry Shever-Drummerung. I know I mispronounced that, but she's got one of the longest names in human history.
Hey, Kevin, can I just interject too? That I saw in the credits too, Jon Favreau was a consultant on this episode.
Yeah, I think he's been a consultant on more than one. Actually, I think he's still got his hands on Orville, and I do like that. So we got Victor Garber back as Admiral Halsey briefly, so that was kind of nice. And we've got a few more of our main cast members that kind of got to shine a little bit. We got Scott Grimes, of course, as Gordon Malloy. Bortus had some lines in this as well. But let's talk about our guest star here. Elizabeth Gillies, Gillies, if I'm pronouncing that right or wrong, played this character, Denal. And Denal is a female multiphasic planet humanoid that made her debut in this episode. And she is Denal. Of course, mentions that they once worshipped Kelly Grayson as the Kelly. And so she kind of just basically puts him through these life or death trials to kind of experience what it's like to be mortal again and fear death and see death come to you. And I wanted to get your thoughts on her, Kyle. I'm trying to see. She's been in some other things here real quick. She's been in the recent New Dynasty. She was in the movie Vacation, the reboot. She played Jade West in the series Victorious. She's also done voice on Family Guy, so there's a tie there to Seth MacFarlane. Done stuff for Robot Chicken, and I do remember her in this role, Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, the limited Dennis Leary series, which was on FX. I really enjoyed that series. It only lasted 2 seasons though, where he was a famous rocker kind of trying to come back into the scene and stuff. But I wanted to get your thoughts on Denal here, Kyle.
First and foremost, does the MCP know one of his programs has escaped the game grid?
Yeah, I know, right? Look like she stepped right off of Tron, right?
I thought it was very interesting, especially having that connective tissue back to that episode from the finale of season 1. And I think too that the concept that she was trying to bring and explain why they were doing this with this crew actually makes a lot of sense. And I think it's something, an aspect of immortality that doesn't get addressed a lot. And that's the aspect of what happens when you've done everything. What happens when you feel like you've seen everything? And especially in her race's case, because of the 700-year time differences with that. So they've gone through probably who knows how many cycles of life to this point where they've just become a transcendent being. And yet they're still trying to find ways to feel human in a way. Yeah, and I think that was very interesting. I remember Elizabeth from that Vacation remake. Actually, I had seen that. Interesting character, but again, I think part of the problem here, Kevin, was that by the time we get to this, there's so little time left in the episode. I don't really feel like we got a full dive into everything that was going on with this. It was just like, okay, we got this explanation. That was it. I would like to know more about this character. I'd like to know more about where this race stands now, other than just, oh, hey, we've done it all and we're immortal.
Right. Yeah. A little bit more on Elizabeth Gillies. First of all, she is accomplished, not only accomplished actress, but singer as well. She debuted in the musical 13 and landed the role of Jade West in the hit Nickelodeon series Victorious. And in addition to, of course, to acting, she focused heavily on music, which has been a strong passion of hers since childhood. And there's another tie here. She most recently released a jazz EP with Seth MacFarlane entitled Songs from Home. So there you go.
Interesting.
Yeah. She is out of New Jersey, by the way. I liked her portrayal in this. She had this not necessarily superior than thou, alien over humanoid kind of thing, but I just liked how she was, very very sure of herself, and not necessarily talking down to them, but letting them know why she was doing what she was doing, and not beating around the bush. And I liked her look. I thought she looked really, really cool. Just that's just kind of interesting. And I wanted to mention one of these things here where, in a Reddit thread discussing Mortality Paradox, many users have compared Denal to Q from Star Trek. So
I wasn't getting that feeling at all. And no, I wasn't feeling a Q kind of thing there.
Okay. Well, I got an article again. Of course, I like to go to our Den of Geek friends there, and this was done by Michael Wynn Johnson, published on June 16th, 2022. And goes on to say, Mortality Paradox and away team from the Orville faces their greatest fears in a surreal but intriguing episode of New Horizons. To many humans, a mystery is irresistible. It must be solved. Wise words from the arguably the wisest of captains in modern television history, Jean-Luc Picard. A quotation that encapsulates not only human behavior, but one of the Roddenberry mottos that often serves as a driving force for these fictional travelers to explore strange new worlds. The production team of the Orville New Horizons embraces this motto long ago. No matter the danger, the Orville pushes through the eternal darkness of space looking for answers. And that's what makes episode 3, Mortality Paradox, one of the more intriguing adventures the crew has had. The mystery absolutely drives the story from beginning to end, and much like Picard once says, it's irresistible. Some viewers might be slightly confused by the random nature of some of the scenes, a 90s era CG troll that comes out of nowhere, or how 40-year-olds get cast as teenagers, but ultimately it is a very enjoyable ride. The ride is very reminiscent of the classic science fiction adventures many of us grew up with. Each vignette feels like it had palpable tension, land actual stakes, regardless of the fact audience members knew no crew member would actually die. Knowing the formula of episodic television should never take away from the fear. It should have you on the edge of your seat. And ironically, Mortality Paradox follows up an alleged horror episode last week. Seems like higher stakes with larger thrills. Co-executive producer and writer of the series, Sherry, long name, I'm not going to say it again, gave us one of the best balanced scripts of the series as seen in quite a while. Executive producer Brandon Braga once told Den of Geek, the writing team strived to mimic the success of his Star Trek First Contact. He promised for the run of season 3, they tried to mix thrills, humor, adventure, even a little horror. Sherry would also be praised for the bits of continuity she threw into the story as well. The moment we revisit Ensign Burke's tension with Isaac was a nice touch, as was the callback to season's 1 Mad Idolatry, which was the driving force for this episode. So I want to get your comment on this last paragraph here about how Sherry gave us one of the best balanced scripts of the series has seen in quite a while. And that that Brandon Baraga and the writing team strive to mimic the success of the first Contact. He promised, of course, this run for season 3, and they tried to make some thrills and stuff. Are we seeing a balanced script here?
Kyle? I don't know if it's a balanced script per se, but I think what they're referring to here is that everybody got a little bit of a moment to shine in this episode, and the first 2 episodes have been a little more centric upon Dr. Finn, a little bit on Isaac. So we haven't really, I know we talked about this a little last week. We wanted to see in future episodes more of the crew get a little bit more of the spotlight. I felt like this one, nobody really per se had the spotlight. Maybe Malloy a little bit in the beginning, but because of how this episode went, everybody felt like they kind of got a moment, but nobody really stood out per se either. It was kind of just like handing off of the baton almost through the episode.
Yeah, compared to the first 2, I mean, if you want to balance, I guess if you want a balanced script or story, yes, more of the crew seems involved in this. Whether that makes it balanced or not, I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that. It had a little bit more lighter moments, but not quite what we're used to expect. The last part of this article, it goes on to say, more importantly, unlike the previous 2 episodes of the season, Mortality Paradox gives several cast members a chance to shine, just as you mentioned, Kyle. In the first 2 episodes of the first season, we've only had Dr. Finn's stories to chew on, and both have been fairly heavy. This episode gave us a chance to get Malloy's trademark sarcasm, learn a little more about the Moclan culture, see various alien creatures of varied computer-generated success, but most importantly, just have fun, and he gave it a rating of a 4 out of 5. I would probably drop this more down to a 3 out of 5 for me personally. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah, I think 3 out of 5 is about where I stand. Honestly, that I would put it. That's kind of how I feel about the season so far. About 3 out of 5. I thought the premiere was a 4 out of 5, but I think the last 2 have both been a solid 3 out of 5.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. All right, well, up next, we've got some trivia for Mortality Paradox, and we've got some more away mission discussions. So we're going to warp on out of here. A break from the Union Federation discussion and let you know what other great shows are on the Fandom Podcast Network. Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom. All right, welcome back to Union Federation. This is episode 133. We are discussing the Orville New Horizons, season 3, episode 3, Mortality Paradox. And we continue with some episode trivia and Easter eggs. It's revealed that Tala's father is also in the Union service, as it has been established that military service is typically looked down on Zalea. The fact that Tala's father preceded her in the service may explain her desire to serve. We saw that a little bit with our other Zalaean security chief, didn't we, Kyle?
Yeah, her parents were not exactly thrilled that she was part of the Union.
Yeah. The underlying theme is similar to 2 episodes from Star Trek Next Generation. The first being Star Trek Next Generation, where silence has lease, and the second being Star Trek Next Generation, Allegiance, both involved an alien species trying to learn more about their captives and presenting them with alliances to overcome. While the first dealt with how people handle death, the other had decoys to interact with others, both entailing treating the Enterprise crew as lab rats in some form of experiment on them, with the latter Star Trek episode and this Orville episode both trying to justify the behavior by claiming that no one was in any real danger, overlooking the fact that being held captive and experimented on is still wrong. Silence has lease, if I remember. That's the one with the Naglium character, and they try to make them forget, but there were clues that were left. I think that's what that one was. And then Allegiance was those 2 telepathic aliens. I think they kidnapped Picard and then put like a fake Picard in there and stuff. I don't know if you remember those or not.
Yeah, I do remember that episode.
Yeah, Naglium or Naglium, forget what that one was. But yeah, that was an interesting one. So yeah, a little Star Trek crossover, so to speak here, Kyle.
Yeah, but this is something the Orville does. They like to pull a little bit from Next Gen, especially Next Gen, and give us some of those feels.
And it also is going to give us great material because I'm sure that Amy and I would love to go back and do our Union Fed episodes where we compare an Orville episode with a Next Gen episode that has similar storylines and see which one delivered it best. So that
I think that'll be a fun project for you once the season is over.
Yes, definitely. So we got some production trivia here. While filming Electric Sheep in the first week in November, the crew shot minor footage of Mortality Paradox, gathering material in preparation for filming this episode. Shadow Realms and possibly Gently Falling Rain, which is the next episode coming up next week. The crew had to film carefully around Jessica Zor, who played Tala Kiali, who at that point had become noticeably pregnant with her character, as her character is not pregnant. Filming concluded sometime before March 13th, 2020, although probably well before. Editing took place around April 13th. Some remaining scenes were not filmed until the end of 2021 because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Jessica had given birth. So, yeah, a lot of hurdles trying to get this show done. And I know that there's a lot of restrictions regarding COVID, Kyle.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm keeping in mind when I'm watching episodes of the Orville right now, is because it's been so long and everything they went through. And I know they had a lot of extra stuff with obviously the sale of Fox to Disney, which caused some changes in decisions and things like that. Plus Orville with the COVID restrictions, and then, like I said, I know Jessica Zor was pregnant as well during this time. So yeah, they had a lot of hoops they had to jump through to get things. And I think it's one of the reasons why the season has been so much delayed in comparison to a lot of stuff that's already come back from COVID.
Yeah, and of course on the Union Federation Twitter and Instagram page too, we cover a lot of the cast members from Star Trek and the Orville, and Jessica was kind of showing her getting bigger, and then eventually when she had her baby, she was sharing this on social media. So you can always look for that though. The Inside the Orville Mortality Paradox, a bonus feature, includes on Hulu. Andre Bormanis, co-executive producer and regular writer for the series, describes the episode as being a bit of departure for the series, almost bordering on fantasy. He states that Captain Mercer went down to Nairn 1 because of being a mystery, which he loves. Episode director John Cassar found it exciting and different because of being able to do environments that they'd never done before. According to Bormanis, Denal's ability comes entirely through extremely advanced technology. And this episode runs 61 minutes long, including all credits, but not including commercials. This makes it approximately 10 minutes shorter than the previous 2 installments, through still the 3rd longest single episode of the series. So, did you feel, I know we talked about this last week, about having the extra time on Hulu. I don't know if it was just a lot of time being spent around the scenes in the high school. Did you feel that this was a decently paced episode, or did it have little pacing issues for you?
I don't want to. I guess you can call it pacing. I just felt like, again, sections of the story felt more. They spent more time in one place than another. And when you look back at this episode as a whole, the fact that they really spent more time in that high school than they did with the other segments really kind of makes it seem a little out of bounds. And I think kind of threw the story just a little bit out of whack here. But yeah, I do think it's.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to ask, I do think as far as the time, I'm glad this was actually a little shorter than the last 2 episodes, because I really, especially last week felt like there was a lot of places where they were trying to do a little bit of filler to try to give them, but this one, at least that helped it feel a little more tight, but again, just unbalanced in how it portrayed where they were at.
Yeah, I don't know if we needed that scene in the history class with Bortus and Tala trying to like get out the side window. I don't think that was necessary. There's a few scenes in the high school that I felt that just went a little long. If we're going to talk about, I guess this kind of leading up to, the bully scenes, obviously with one of our members in being threatened by bullies. I don't know if we needed as much as we did. So, maybe it could have been shorter, but I would have seen a lot more with the other characters in their near-death experiences. Well, let's get into our away missions. We'll be discussing the storylines of this week's series. So let's head to away mission number 1. So, Kyle, this topic of this episode is something that, as we teased a little earlier, that our Highlander movie and TV series deals with, and that is the burden of immortality. Denal originates from this multiphasic planet, which the members of which once worshipped Kelly Grayson as the Kelly. Roughly 50,000 years have passed from their perspective since their previous encounter with the crew of the USS Orville 2 years ago. Denal and the others of their kind have become seemingly immortal, and thus Denal tests several members of the Orville's crew by subjecting them to scenarios to witness the fear of death through their eyes. So, as we talk about a lot on our Bloody Kings Highlander podcast, because it has been obviously explored in the Highlander movies, but also several episodes of Highlander about the burden of immortality, outliving people that you love, going through the motions, and because when you think about it, even though you're immortal, you're still human. So you're still dealing with human stuff. You're not an alien, you're not morphing into anything. You're basically still you. You just can't die unless you get your head removed. That's how that happens in the Highlander universe. But still, we see in that universe a lot of immortals just going through the paces of years and years, and they have to reinvent themselves, get new identities because they're on Earth. But these characters obviously come from another planet that, Kelly got encountered with them. We see immortality through other movies as well. A lot of vampire movies, of course. Vampires are immortal once they turn into a vampire. And we've seen other versions of like what was it? It was the Charlize Theron one that we had. The
old guard.
The old guard. They touched on that as well. The living with immortality on Earth and stuff. So Kyle, the way that we get from our character of Denal here, how they've kind of basically have become immortal because they've evolved so much, and it seems like they've become sort of complacent and bored, and they want to know what it's like to almost die, I guess. And that's why she puts the Orville crew through this trial. And then at the end of the episode, we get that discussion, of them discussing what happened, and Mercer says that he wants to become immortal. You know, he would like to see what happens. He would like to outlive other people. What are your thoughts?
So I think this is interesting because there's a couple different ways to portray mortality within the entertainment industry. Obviously, you have the Highlander way or the Old Guard or even with vampires, but you're on the same planet. You're still evolving with that planet, even though you're changing identities and having to maintain that. You're evolving with the society. Whereas here we are dealing with immortality on a cosmic type level. They've ascended through their evolution, or whatever they want to call it now, because they say evolution is messy and not perfect. Whatever they've achieved, they're on a totally different level and see the universe on a totally different level. And I think that always makes it a lot more interesting with that kind of immortality and that aspect, because there's a different way to portray that. And how they portrayed it here, and I find it very interesting, is it kind of even links to Picard season 2, where they are trying to experience death to kind of remind them a little bit of their humanity because they're bored. While in Picard season 2, we've got Q, who we thought was supposedly immortal, is dying. So you've got this immortal race. You've got that, and I think that's interesting. But to me, the highlight of the episode was the conversation at the end of it, and I thought Ed's answer was very fascinating, and also reflects a lot into his character. He wants to see his nature as an explorer and as wanting to always be learning. He wants to see the whole story. He wants to live to forever so he can see the story. But then, like this with this race here, it gets to a point where you've done everything. You've seen the whole story. So what happens when you get to that point? There's nothing more to see. Or because it's eventually, like everything else, things are going to repeat. So I think that's a very fascinating situation there.
Being immortal on one planet, like we see in Highlander, and we're not going to talk about Zeist.
Yeah. What are you talking
about? Because they're immortal on Earth, and you know, all vampire movies we've seen, they've usually been immortal on Earth. You know, rarely we see stories about immortality outside of Earth, and seeing the advancement of Denal and her species from this planet, and that they've roughly, 50,000 years have passed since the perspective they last had seen the Orville crew, where for the Orville crew, it was just 2 years ago. I can see being immortal in one area like Earth, and like we've seen with Highlander, can become a burden. There's only so many places that you can go and see. But being immortal and having the advancement of being able to go to other places and other planets and other universes and having that technology, I don't know how I could become bored with that and want to start questioning my own mortality and like, is this it? Why don't I just end things and die? There was a Highlander episode or two that touched on an immortal that just wanted to die. They were done. They didn't want to live anymore. They lost the zest for knowledge and such, or whatever it is that you want to, put the, add to the list of burdens of being immortal, Kyle. But Denal's race has advanced so far they can pretty much go wherever and do whatever they want to do. And then when you compare that to the Q continuum, I'm just trying to think like, how there was a Q, I think there was an episode of Voyager where he wanted to commit suicide, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right?
Yes.
And I found that topic fascinating. I'm like, if you're allowed to do whatever you want and go wherever you want, I mean, where's the limits? I don't see wanting to end my life because I'm exhausted of limits. If I was immortal, I'd try to do as much as I could on Earth. But if I could outlive people to where the technology takes us off Earth, I would want to do that. Or, if I was in Denal's situation, I could take myself anywhere without, outside of Earth's technology. I don't know if that's making sense, but I'm kind of with Mercer there, where I just want to keep it going and try to reinvent myself, try to learn about as much as I could, other races, other beings, other, thoughts and ways to look at just things in general. I don't know if I'd want to find a way. I mean, outliving people that you like and love obviously could take its toll. But I don't know if that would consume me enough to where I'd want to just stop living.
Well, see, now I have a curiosity about this too, as we talk about this, Kevin, is in the case of Denal's people, have they, yes, they don't die, they live in immortality, but can they be killed?
Right.
They don't really address that. So I'm assuming here with the way they're talking, there's a threat they can't even be killed by something. So
right.
that makes that's kind of one of those intriguing questions that's still out there.
Yeah, in Highlander, if you're shot or whatever, burned or something like that, you come back to life and your body regenerates. But it's when you lose your head is when you die. So yeah, and it's interesting that when it comes to immortal characters in certain stories, there is a way to kill them. But if you're just a race where something could kill you, like disease or something, maybe that's eventually what takes you out of the situation. But if you become true immortal and you are impervious to anything that would kill most beings, that makes the story more interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of get the feeling that Denal is part of that type of species where nothing can kill you. I mean, when nothing can kill you, some people could get a power trip and take advantage of it that way and threaten people, or some people could look at it differently and try to empower themselves. Why didn't the Q continuum become an evil power threat and just kill whoever they wanted?
Yeah, well, no, and that's one of the interesting things about that kind of mortality, because who knows, maybe if you look through their history, at one point they did act like gods on certain civilizations.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, but that kind of immortality opens up those kind of storylines, which makes things even more interesting.
Yeah, interesting discussion on immortality. It's something that Lee and I on Bloody Kings have always loved discussing, and it's one of those discussions that never gets old with Highlander fans. So there you go.
That's true.
All right, let's head into away mission number 2. So I found an article on trekmovie.com, and it brought up something that we've touched on a little bit here, but I want to have a little further discussion on it, Kyle. Is after a second episode that stumbled in terms of quality and creativity, the Orville roars back to form with an adventure that makes our characters to their personal and it takes our characters to their personal and psychological limits in the context of a weird sci-fi mystery, all wrapped up in utopian futuristic glitter paper. There are a few laughs to be had in this straight dramatic piece, but episode 3 is certainly best of the season so far. So Kyle, you mentioned and you talked about, we were kind of missing some of the Orville fun. Do you agree that this is the best season or best episode of season 3 thus far? Only 3 episodes in. Did it have some of the fun return?
There was some fun there, but it still didn't feel quite like that kind of Orville fun. And I don't agree that this is the best episode of the season. Now, it's a very thought-provoking, get you thinking episode, but I still think the season premiere to me right now is the best episode of the season.
I would agree. It was a very dramatic episode, and the whole thing with Isaac and prejudice against him, and obviously the Kalons and stuff, that was done really, really well. So yeah, I would agree with you there. I'm hoping some more fun comes up. I want to see some of those personal. I like it when they're off duty. Have you noticed that? They unzip the uniform jacket. That's when they're off duty. And that's when they can just kind of have fun and talk about stuff. And I'd like to see maybe a relationship or a romance blossom as well. What do you want to see happen going forward?
I'm like you. I want some of those more off-duty moments and some of those personal life kind of moments, which they haven't had this season. Let's be honest. A little bit with Claire, with her relationship with the Admiral in the second episode.
And her sons, yeah.
And her sons. But they've been kind of the centerpiece of those first 2 episodes. But you just didn't. It's those little personal interactions, and they've been there, but they haven't been there in the quantity that is normally there for the Orville that we got accustomed to in the first 2 seasons. And I want to see more of that come back. The episode that comes to mind is when they had the time capsule and they're looking at all the stuff that's in the time capsule, and they're all making their own
lasting impressions.
Yeah, and they're all making their own individual comments about that and everything like that. But those are the kind of stories I want to see more from the Orville. I mean, I'm glad that they're getting a chance to get a little bit more with their science fiction, and Seth MacFarlane's getting to dive into that a little bit more. But give us, to me, that's great. But the heart of the Orville is the personal interactions, and I need to see a little bit more of that.
I'm glad you brought up lasting impressions, because I watched part of that a few weeks ago or a few weeks before this new season premiered, and I think it's probably still my favorite episode of the Orville.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So this is where if we have any other comments or react. And by the way, I just want to say I agree with everything that you said regarding more personal interactions. We want to see more of that. We want to, and Charlie's still kind of like, she's very defensive about how she feels about, Isaac, but I do want to see a little bit more with her as well, to see if we like her. I'm glad that we
flesh her out a little more.
I'm glad we got some background with her for the reason why she's obviously not liking Isaac, and maybe something can happen between those two where she lightens up on him a little bit. Maybe we'll see. But this is where we kind of talk about some other comments or reactions to this week's episode. And I got a few things here I wanted to bring up. First of all, Randall the Bully. It's a cave troll, bro.
They always bring a cave troll. Yeah, that I have to admit, that one was a little shocking. That's when I was like, okay, what the heck are they doing with this episode? But that was also some of the Orville fun that I was been talking about that I missed. Yeah. Something that's just so out of there is like, okay, where are they going with this?
They have a cave troll.
Yeah.
The Zalayan chocolate truffles. Tala's mom makes them. Mercer says that they are the most dense chocolate he's tasted. Tala replies, heavy gravity, heavy desserts. Boris, and we find out that Bortus is dieting for his summer body, which I thought was funny. I'm really kind of curious to find out what kind of actual chocolate truffles those were, because they were eating something yummy.
Yeah, I need some of those in my life. So, Jessica, if you're listening, you could always bring us some of those. We wouldn't mind. Yeah, and chocolate trusses. I'm all in for that.
And it felt like we had a scene from Mean Girls where Bortus replies to the snobby girl, and right before he replies, you saw Malloy whisper something in his ear, and Bortus goes to the snobby girl, "You have a 5 head."
Well, okay, so this is one of that is one of the moments, because I love the Bortus Malloy interactions, because Malloy plays up on Bortus so much, and he knows that if he says it doesn't carry the same way. But Bortus saying it the way Bortus delivers the lines is just classic.
And my last thing, are we going to have a new Easter tradition, Mocklin funeral eggs?
That was disturbing. When you open it up, is there a little Clytus in there or something?
Interesting to see the funeral ritual for Mocklins, where they just kind of put the corpses in these hanging eggs for
9 days. For 9 days, they just to marinate, make peace.
Did you have any other comments or reactions to this week's episode, Kyle?
I give them a lot of credit. They went for a deep sci-fi meaning. I mean, and they went with some classic tropes. You had the creature under the water, which is always a fearful thing, and you had the plane crash. And once we hit that plane crash, that's when I felt like, okay, now I know what they're doing. That became, I think, fairly obvious and reveal. They made a great attempt. I think it's definitely deep and thought provoking when I like when the Orville does get like that, but I just think that their execution of the balance of it needed a little work. And I'm hoping next week, because I have seen a preview for next week's episode. I'm looking forward to next week's episode, because I really think this is the episode where we're going to get some interesting questions and hopefully the return of some of a familiar face or two as well.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and head into our wrap up and contact information and look into the Orb of Prophecy. Enjoyed our discussion here on Union Federation episode 130. Was it 133? Right, the Orville. Yeah, New Horizons, of course, and we've been discussing Mortality Paradox here. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network master feed at fpnet.podbean.com, but please also subscribe to our Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel, please, and share it. And we're getting a lot of new programming on the YouTube channel, of course, these episodes. So make sure you check that out if you want to watch instead of listen. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms. Please join our Union Federation Podcast Facebook group as well, where, of course, we share and discuss both things Star Trek and the Orville. And Union Federation is also on Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to contact us directly, you can hail us at email at theunionfederation@gmail.com. My name is Kevin. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. Kyle, where can we find you?
You can find me floating around Twitter at AKyleW, and I can be seen zooming around Instagram at AKyleFandom.
Nice. And also our co-host here, Haley, is on Twitter at Trekkie01D, and Amy is on Twitter as well as at Miss Amy Nelson. We are also working with the BQN network there. We're sharing programs there, and the BQN has a lot of great Star Trek programming. We're dropping them here on the Fandom Podcast Network. They are on Twitter and Instagram at BQN Podcast, and they also have their own Facebook group, the BQN Collective for the listener group. So we're going to look into the Orb of Prophecy tomorrow. We're actually going to be discussing the most recent episode of Strange New Worlds called the Serene Squall. That debuted on June 16th, 2022. And then, of course, next episode on June 23rd is episode 8 called The Elysian Kingdom. So looking forward to that. Enjoying Star Trek Strange New Worlds thus far, Kyle?
I'm going to tell you right now, of what I will call the Paramount Plus era of Star Trek, it is by far my favorite show. It's fun. It's fun every week. It's got a great sense of adventure, and I love the cast. And I mean, this isn't to say anything less about Discovery or Picard as far as the live action side of things, but this show gives me everything that I want from Star Trek, and I'm loving it.
Yes, agreed. All right, so next Orville episodes is called Gently Falling Rain. And I'm looking at the IMDb. There's not much on there right now, but it looks like that we're getting some guest star. We're getting some Krill characters apparently. So they have something to do with Krill. We'll see.
Yes,
there's some actors that are listed as Krill characters. So this will be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to that. We'll see what happens. But just to reply what you just said, Strange New World so far, I think, has been the most fun of the new Paramount Plus live action. I'll definitely say that. So,
I just want to rein into. I saw a little brief ad for next week's Orville. I'm excited that we're getting more into the relationship with the Krill, because that's been something I've been looking forward to since they kind of got that treaty during the Kaelon War. So I'm looking forward to seeing that dynamic play out a little bit more, because it's always been a very interesting dynamic between the Krill and the Union. So now that we have this whole new thing, we tested it a little bit in episode 2, but now I think we're going to have a deeper dive into it, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for helping me helm this latest episode of Union Federation.
Absolutely. It's always a blast to talk the Orville, and I'm looking forward to taking over the captain's chair to talk a little Strange New Worlds here too. That's been fun. I can't get that coif though, man. The hair isn't there. I'm sorry, people.
You're talking about the pike hair?
Yeah, exactly. Which if you go by the internet now, I think it wraps about halfway around the planet. But
yeah, it's getting bigger every week apparently, and people are having fun with it. So yeah. Well, thank you, Kyle, and thank you everyone for listening and watching here on the Fandom Podcast Network. The latest episode here of the Union Federation. Goodbye, everyone. Hailing frequencies are now closed.